Do it, Dr. Frankenstein.
Good evening, and welcome to this episode of Once Upon a Ramble, where us, the Dungeons and Dragons group known as Once Upon a Roll, sit down and talk about things related to our campaign or Dungeons and Dragons in general. This time around, we are talking about Nemo's player character, Ellavorn, joined by everyone and a new face that has not yet had his voice heard, but soon will. Duck. So, kicking things off, let's talk a little bit about the character creation process, the thought process behind Ellavorn, and how we do stuff in general as part of our group when it comes to character creation. Now, when we started some 3 years ago, about a little more than that at this point, I believe, we strictly pulled races and classes from the player's handbook, and the player's handbook alone. The only limitation I had put on you from that, other than only from the player's handbook, was no drow. No drow elves. But of all the characters that were created, Ellavorn's had a unique issue, at least in my mind, as the maybe too paranoid, I suppose, dungeon master, when Nemo came to me saying that she wanted to be an elf, not a half elf, but a full blown elf. I suppose first question, Nemo, why did half elf not appeal to you the same way that the character that you ended up making a high elf did?
Well, for one, there's the weirdness that, probably high elves wouldn't be druids. But also just, I don't know, going halfway didn't seem enough.
So your desire to be an elf led us to have to do some pretty creative things, and the reason being because I don't believe you wanted to play a child.
No, that would be weird for the group, and probably me.
And a fully mature, or at least a properly aged elf, it doesn't make too much sense to have a 100-plus-year-old being starting as a first level character. So we had to come up with a story, a reason for Ellavorn to, well, be who she was at the start of the campaign. And that also led us down an interesting path where everybody else has their backstory and has a fundamental knowledge of where their character came from going in. You didn't have that with Ellavorn because of what we had to, for the logic of a 100-plus-year-old elf being first level with no real worldly skills or experience. Something that we had to do. And that was the story that at some point in your past, a past that you don't remember, Ellavorn was transformed into a squirrel. And she lived as a squirrel for a long, long, long time. Until one day, due to events and intervention by a deity that she would come to have a relationship with, you were transformed back into your elf form. Although back into is not really the way that Ellavorn felt at the time, as you played as this elf form was less natural to her than the squirrel was. But that's essentially what you went in going. You didn't have a real say in how it happened or where you came from or what happened before. Because whereas everybody else, due to their backstory and all of their relationships and what they have going forward, they know where they're wanting to take their characters eventually. They know the storylines that their characters are on, the paths that they are on. So while everyone else is looking forward, Ellavorn's path forward is to figure out her past, essentially. So I suppose in some way everybody does have their own path. Everybody does have a personal story to follow. Now, did any part of that trouble you while you were making it? Did you want to maybe have more of a say in the background, or what were your thoughts at the time, if you can even remember?
Well, talking about it, it was like, sure, I could try to be like, oh yes, I would like for her to have this background, but then I would know the background, and that would make it harder to be like, oh, I have no idea who I am. That just, so this way it's just actually legitimate, discovering it as I go.
Exactly. And not sure if the other people in our group are aware, and this is kind of strictly for them, but you legitimately have no idea about anything dealing with Ellavorn's past. And probably more so than anybody else, things dealing with our campaign storylines and what big surprises that I throw at you guys. You are probably the one I'm most secretive with, because I have to be, since we, live together. But
I
yeah,
just make minis, just the terrible, horrific things we fight in combat, that's all.
yeah, I just give her, hey, I want this to cut out. It's about this big. And she's like, what the fuck is this thing? I'm like, don't you worry about it. You'll see. Says
You
the
don't see
dice
the
decided that you would be quite terrible at one stat specifically, and it was up to you to decide which stat that was. What went into, did that kind of form a more like idea of what Ellavorn's personality would be, or did you know going in and decide to place it then, or was it kind of hand in hand?
Obviously, when you're rolling stats for a character, you don't want to have like horrifically bad stats, but it happens sometimes. I think initially I was like, well, what is this charisma stuff for? What do I need that?
Yeah.
So that was like originally, where I was going with that. But we talked a little bit, and then kind of this idea of maybe because wisdom is important for a druid. It definitely shouldn't be wisdom, but like maybe Ellavorn is not the brightest bulb in the pack.
No. So that was an interesting choice to have intelligence be the quote unquote dump stat, especially with, what is it, I believe a 6?
Yeah,
6 or
we're
7?
rolling with the -2 modifier.
6 gang.
Yeah, Ellavorn is as smart as Durand is good at talking to people.
They
Put that into
complement each
Hmm?
other. See, they complement each other. Perfect for each other.
Put it into perspective, Netadian is better at noticing things than Durand or Ellavorn are at their respective stats. And Neradian doesn't notice anything.
You're blind as a fuck.
So, sort of continuing on that, going into the character's personality, was it difficult for you to try to get into what this character would be like, how they would act as a person, when for the most of their existence they had been this small woodland animal? Because I think, especially at the beginning, we kind of saw, even kind of now, we do see those roots in Ellavorn in her personality.
Well, in the beginning, it was like, what would she find strange? Like what would be weird to her? And I was like, everything needing a specific name, like talking about people, because I feel like not everything would just name itself like out in the world. Like this is the bird Jeff.
Gotcha. Yeah, Ellavorn did have a thing with names at the beginning there for a long time.
But more than that, it was just sort of like trying to. I guess Ellavorn, I see her as just sort of like observing people. I know that she's like very kind of rambunctious at times, but she's still like, well, why are you doing that?
Yeah. And so that was a big part of Ellavorn, I feel, was her drive to just understand these strange new creatures that she is a part of now. So, jumping into where we kicked off the campaign in the Grapevine Inn and Tavern in Crestfield, Ellavorn had probably the most eccentric entrance of any character. So, from the people that were here from the beginning, Cele and Dune, if you have any input or like, what were first impressions of Ellavorn throughout that very first encounter, as well as maybe the first little bit of actually traveling with the character, and as a player looking at how this character was being played and their persona and just first impression type things.
There was I mean, I guess the most apparent thing was that she was probably going to be doing majority of the talking from my first impression. It was like Ellavorn's going to talk to literally anything that breathes. And since I was playing the edgelord silent guy at the time, it's like, okay, well, that's perfect, because then I could just stay the edgy silent guy and say my edgy one-liners whenever I intended to.
Kind of like what Dune said, that she probably would be talking a lot and everything, but it's like, because yeah, she doesn't really maybe know much about the world and everything. It was like, what? Even still, it's like, what are you doing, kind of thing.
Always
Arguably, that happens to this day. She approaches something and we're like, what? Wait, what do you do?
Like, yeah, that's the whole thing. That it's funny. It's nice still that she does it, and I really liked it that one time when shopping, and there was like, you have to like try to haggle things, and yeah, probably Neri should have explained it better, but Ellavorn was just like, here, take all of my money, basically. It's so haggling.
Yeah, counting isn't something she does. I mean, sometimes at night, when you guys are, like, during your long rest and she's on watch, she might count you to make sure all of you are there, but otherwise...
Oh my god.
With Duck's introduction, with the introduction of Duck's character, she might be reaching her upper limit on that. Might have to watch out.
Oh no.
He almost got his whole hand.
Yeah, we can take another player after Duck. Won't get caught.
So it was that, and like that was the like you said, Cele, that instance, it was a very nice like sort of dynamic between the two characters. It's not just that Ellavorn is bad with numbers, but just the concept of money at all was so foreign to her, and Neridion's character, the character of Neridion, based on her upbringing, this money was very important because that's how you live, is money. So it was very interesting to see Ellavorn just be like, how much is this? Okay, you can take however much that is. This is all my money. Take whatever much that is and give me the thing, please. Thank you. So, now, we talked about, you guys mentioned, both of you mentioned that Ellavorn was very talkative, that you guys thought or saw that she would be the one doing most of the talking, and to some extent that was true. But we also had another player at the time who I feel worked very well in tandem with Ellavorn's character. Because Ellavorn was the talker as far as getting the foot in the door or making introductions, or I guess if you call just running up to somebody, screaming at them and waving an introduction, that's a way to do it. But we also had a very analytical, questioning type of player with us that would take Ellavorn's, what she brought to the party essentially, and then use that to further whatever mission you guys were on. That was a nice dynamic that was pretty much the case until that other player left us. And after that, I remember sitting down with all of you guys and talking about the aftermath of that and being like, we're all gonna have to step up. We're all gonna have to take our game to another level to compensate for this other player leaving. And really, you guys did. I feel like that was the point where Nedadion and Durand, as well as the players playing them, Cele and Dune, began to take more active roles in the actual interactions and role playing and investigation parts of the missions to keep the story moving forward. And it was actually, I think it was, we might have had like a session or two where it was a bit bumpy, but you guys picked it up quick. I feel, I don't want to say I'm glad it happened because obviously player leaving isn't the best, but like when I said that we all have to step up, you guys definitely did. So initially, Nemo, you created Druid. Was it always Druid, looking through the player's handbook, looking at the classes, or what? What did you want? What came first? Was it the class or the character for you?
I think it was the character. Pretty sure that's the order of things.
Okay, and then so the class just kind of fell in naturally with the idea of the character, or were there other options for Ellavorn in your head?
Well, I think I wanted to play this character, and then we rolled some dice, and it was like, well, and how do we explain this character and all this, So yeah, being a druid did make sense, although it was a little awkward because at level 1 I couldn't wild shape.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been a bit odd for Ellavorn, but I also feel like, just that getting used to being a person and maybe that longing to get back to a more comfortable state can explain, the one level that you had to wait to get your wild shape ability. She's kind of like, she must have been really focusing hard on like, am I a squirrel again yet? Please, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's also difficult because to an extent, yes, Ellavorn is very talkative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's it was going both ways.
Yeah, there were many times when you would approach an NPC and it definitely didn't go both ways because not everybody responds well to a wild-haired crazy woman running at them shouting greetings.
Which I guess is fair.
With all of that, with the personality, the quirks of the character, where did you see her fitting in with the group? Maybe before and at the very start. Like, how did you see Ellavorn's role in the party, and how, if at all, did they change, or how did she change as the need to accommodate and fill in arose?
Well, in the beginning, I was just I figured she would probably just kind of be this sort of silly character, not totally serious about anything for the most part, but I didn't really, but as far as like combat and things like that, I was like, well, she's a druid, so she could probably take some damage if needed.
Yeah. At the start, I think that yours and Dune's character kind of shared the tanking job.
And then the player who isn't with us, his character was kind of like a healer type, sort of. But like as his character grew and shifted away from that, I found myself kind of stepping in there a little bit too. So
Yeah. And that's another point that when everyone's making their characters, making their personality, things that I like to bring up is, just like with Ellavorn and her relationship with this deity, it doesn't mean that she has to play a cleric. Not every person with a deity is a cleric, right? Or a paladin. Like even Nedadion, to some extent, does have a god that she worships and has even built a very small shrine to at one point, just to show that aspect of her character. It doesn't have to be predominant or prevalent, but it's still there. She is the furthest thing from a cleric that we have.
she just anti-heals the group. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. There is the reverse cleric.
Reverse cleric. Clerics heal the party. Hi, the opposite.
Yes. I mean, clerics need some they have to do something, so Neri gives them something to do.
There you go. There you go. Now, if only you had a cleric in the party that could do that thing, then that would probably make sense. Anyway, so with everybody needing to step up as we went down to a party of only 3 player characters, you as a player are very astute, very involved in the story, very understanding of it. You're probably the most avid note taker that we have. With that, you play a character that is the exact opposite of that. And so you had to get creative with your ways to use that player knowledge through the character of Ellavorn. And I think that's when we started to see what I really enjoy, which is crazy conspiracy theorist Ellavorn. That's how I see it.
I was gonna say, if they had tinfoil, she'd be wearing it.
Time to invent tinfoil.
Ellavorn makes these ridiculous ties and claims, and I feel that's your way as a player who has this knowledge and understanding to divulge your thoughts and your ideas in a way that's fitting to your character. And it's a very interesting, very clever, and very well executed at most times. Sometimes it really is just like I'm gonna raise an eyebrow as high as it can go because I'm lost at what Ellavorn is saying. But for the most part, I feel like it's a very good implementation of a quirk to this character to both play on, who the character is as well as your strengths as a player. But like that, are there any other changes that you've seen in Ellavorn, just sort of natural changes, not ones that you felt like you had to force, but due to events or due to, time with the other groups, time with the party, with the other characters, that provided or caused some sort of growth or change in her ideals, goals, or worldview?
Well, there was one event in particular, was Nerdion's death, that kind of gave Ellavorn, who otherwise kind of didn't have a sense of time itself, maybe. Because we're always like running around and doing stuff, and it's like, oh, it's not like she's, got a watch and she's like, oh, I'm counting the minutes or whatever. She just, hey, we'll be able to do stuff later.
Good job, Nerdion. You made Ellavorn aware of mortality.
Yay.
It's not like mortality. It's just like a sense of like, hey, if there's something I want to do or say to somebody, like, maybe I should do that instead of just being like, oh, I can get to it later after we're done fighting this demon with a weird upside down head and a right side up head. I don't know what's going on there, but it's gross and it did bad things.
That's an interesting point, because that goes directly against or directly to a decision that Ellavorn had made prior to Neridion's death, and that was the choice to remain in the Feywild while the rest of the group returned to the material plane. Now, that was one time. Like, there have been moments with each player and each character that I do go outside of the game and say, hey, this is what we're working towards, such as with Durand becoming a paladin. Custom homebrew class, we've talked about it outside. And I think that the only thing I told you was, if you do it, it's gonna be okay. Essentially, like, you can make that choice and not have to make a new character, was basically all that I told Nimue. However, with that player knowledge aside, it was still a decision by Ellavorn, and a decision that you chose to have that character make, where the character didn't know when or if at all she would be able to return to the group. Now, before I get your take on it, Nimue, I would like to hear Cele and Dune, the other 2 players at the time that were playing, what they thought about that decision and how maybe their characters interpreted that decision.
Well, I was like, as a player, I was like, wait, what is going on? And everything, but also Neri was kind of like same. It's like, did she really leave us, and what are we gonna do now, and everything, and all kinds of confusions and stuff like that was happening at the time.
So, Cele, as a player, did you expect Nimue to be showing up with a different character, or?
Maybe at least like for a little bit. I was like, but I wasn't gonna worry about it too much because, you know, after all, Nemo's character and she can do whatever she wants to, and
Yeah, and that was also an option, was to have a different character show up for a little bit of time, but that ended up being a little bit too, I guess, complicated if we were gonna have Ellavorn make a return anyway. So that's where, you know, due to strange time dilution and travel between the Fae and material plane, how you know, I think it was even like later on that day, maybe a couple hours for you guys, but nearly a year for Ellavorn, when she showed up with the gaudy makeup and the crazy dress and all the Fae aesthetic about her. So, Nemo, what were your thoughts? Because I think that at that time you were pretty conflicted about that decision.
It was just sort of like we were in the Feywild, and there was this like giant tree, the biggest tree Ellavorn had ever seen, ever. It's like this really cool, crazy like adventure we went on when we were there. But then like we found out like who planted the tree. It's like, how could she not become some kind of weird groupie? You know, for like lack of better words.
Yeah. That was an interesting relationship there as well, between that entity and Ellavorn, that started off with, you know, pretty much her threatening to kill him, I think it was. At least very angrily approaching him, to, in the end, spending nearly a year traveling around with him in the Feywild.
Okay, so it wasn't entirely her fault. I mean, you know, he just kind of like vanished, and this big crazed treant came and like almost smashed us all out of existence. And his excuse was, "Oh, I didn't expect you to live."
Why didn't you tell us that was coming? Well, I didn't expect you to live. And
You know,
didn't think I'd have to be having this awkward conversation. Jumping out to you, can you think of any major moments in the story that you feel really impacted Ellavorn and the development of the character?
the decision not to grab that doorknob.
Really? That stuck with you for that long?
Yeah, I mean, how do you make up for that? That's horrible. Like, of course I couldn't have known what was going to happen, right? You know, because I'm just like all giddy and excited and running ahead, and then I'm like, you know, I really want to touch it, but I'm not going to because I'm trying to be better, right?
And someone else just swoops in, I'll do it. Touch.
Yeah, that's about the size of that one.
Does that still? I don't see how that would affect her to this day. How did that change her or impact her personality or anything like that?
Well, it just sort of made it like, I don't know. I think it was just like a moment where like she's like, I'm kind of responsible for this. Like, this is somewhat my fault. And, you know, this person is not in a great way right now, so we need to help them. Not that she wasn't helpful before, but just even more so. Like, it just kind of created more of a bond with somebody, I guess. Even though it was not really. It's like nothing brings people together as well as abject terror or something like that.
I mean, fair. Nothing brings people together quite like abject terror. Not exactly incorrect. See, that's what I'm going for. I'm just trying to provide unity and cohesiveness and closeness in the group. That's my job.
Right.
Sure.
Let's go a bit into what makes Ellavorn unique, mechanically speaking. Where you might not be able to play this exact character in a different game or under a different DM, because we have homebrewed some things. Now, there was one part of the Circle of the Moon Druid which you are pretty much to a T that you didn't like, and you didn't like from the very beginning looking forward in that class, and you just felt like it went against everything that Ellavorn is, pretty much.
I mean, I still kind of feel that way. It's a very strange thing. I mean, it isn't really, I guess, if you're like just like a full druid and into all of the things like nature and the elemental spirits and like, oh, I can cast fire spells and I can cast ice spells, so it totally makes sense to become an elemental.
Yeah, but we felt more. Well, you felt more that it should be some sort of animal or animal-like form, something more specific to Ellavorn, and so we came up with the custom wild shapes for those in place of those elemental forms, and took a bit of in-game testing and tweaking, but I believe that we've come to a place where they're fairly balanced when compared to their elemental counterparts, and they're all pretty unique and interesting. I mean, as far as honestly, you happy with them? You good with them?
Yeah, for the most part. It is a bit of a trade-off though, because in having those, I can't, use the elemental wild shapes, which are, most of them are, capable of flying and occupying someone's space and all that kind of jazz. But, I do really like the flavor of everything that we created.
I feel like the big trade-off that you have, I mean, you obviously do have a form that can fly. The only things that you don't have that you would have had with elemental is you don't really have a water form, and as far as like the earth elemental go, this that can just willingly move in and through like dirt, earth, and rock, you can't do that either. So there is definitely a trade-off. So like we kind of touched on in Duran's ramble, it started, I believe, with that conversation in the stables in Vasselholm. So, Nemo, as far as Ellavorn is concerned, with her big conspiracy brain, what is Durand? How did that start for you? How do you feel about where it is right now? I don't want to really get into how you see or what you want to do with it going forward, because I say that we just let that play and don't really go in and try to script anything, obviously.
I think the biggest thing about Durand is just that what you see is what you get. There isn't like a sense of like that he's something other than what he is, if that makes sense, because for a lot of people, that's how they are, is, they're many things all at once. And, Durand is many things, but I think that Ellavorn understands most of them, or tries her best to, or finds it easier to, because he isn't.
That makes sense. Actually, I never really thought of it that way. As far as Ellavorn seeing people and seeing them as these supremely complicated beings, and then having this one person that is just honestly pretty straightforward, pretty rational most of the time. At very least, I would say honest, I guess, would be what Durand is at his very core. He might not come forth and just tell you everything without being prodded to, but I'm not sure if... Has Durand lied yet, Dune?
No. No. No, 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 no.
He lied to Mary.
Withheld information. It's different.
It's lying.
I withheld.
He said that his prawn is gonna catch up and everything. That was a lie. It
No,
wasn't gonna catch.
it was just a form of withholding.
I mean, he made a promise. He has to keep that promise.
Yeah,
True.
that's still a lie. He had to lie under, that thing. So.
Okay, maybe honest isn't the best word in terms of like truth and lies, but he's very to his word, I would say. Then, you know, he's very what do you call someone who doesn't break promises? I guess if honest isn't a word.
A real
An
dude.
oath breaker.
No, the opposite of that.
An oath maker. He's an oath maker paladin.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Sure.
He just goes around making all the oaths.
And loaves.
Loaths and oaths.
Loaves of oaths.
I mean, so other than Neridion and to some extent Era just trying to from other sides just push you guys in together at every pass that they can. Just the sort of natural progression of Ellavorn and Durand is a very interesting thing to watch. A very interesting and intriguing thing as, you know, a part of the story that I, the DM, don't have my hands in, really, and that's rare. Obviously, you guys have control over your characters, but as far as creating your own storyline, independent of what's going on in the world and in the campaign, that was the first time that I think that has happened. Now, it's true that any sort of relationship between any two characters, like, you know, Neri and Ellavorn had their own little story arc that was also as interesting, in my opinion. That led to, you know, Neri and Ella being just, for a good amount of just really good friends, it seems.
I mean, we definitely kind of got there eventually.
True. Yeah.
It's like we've talked about so far, the Ellavorn trying to understand everyone and understand people. Obviously, that was a difficult hurdle with the character of Neridion, who had this past that she started, pretty much. So that led to a little bit of head bumping that sort of, I believe, came to a head during that Conquest's End celebration where the two of you had to infiltrate this noble's house, and it was just a comedy of errors. It was amazing. I love that scene. But comparing that to, you know, Ellavorn and Netadiana as friends and pulling off what they pulled off in the monastery when they went in there together, that was like, you know, this is how it looks when it's done right, when we're on the same page, and this is what it looks like when we weren't.
Oh, it was more than not being on the same page. I think we were like in different books in different sections of the library.
Yeah. All the books.
I love the books.
But yeah, like the cooperative thing we did in the monastery, that was really cool. It was fun.
It was. Yeah. Distract, I steal stuff.
Yes, you distract, and I'll put my hand into a burning brazier.
Yes.
Sound fair? Yeah, there we go. The floor is open to everybody, except for Nemo. What are you guys', if you have any sort of thoughts on the character or questions as to what you might be interested in as far as Ellavorn's personal story, maybe things about the character, just open forum to make your thoughts about Ellavorn known or ask Nemo about Ellavorn.
Yo, what's your beef with Era?
I think that started before Era had even come up, and from me watching that, because that was also a little bit of a, in my opinion, it reminded me a little bit of Neri and Ella before they made nice, except now instead of one explosive element, we have two explosive elements. So that was fun. It did seem at time like you guys were coming close to a resolution, like even in Ambervale. But I mean, I'll let Nemo talk on it. I guess if you want to elaborate more, we just leaving at what's the beef.
Long time ago, in a different part of the province, there was a Phoenix Academy Tower. And stuff happened. And I don't think anybody in the party was extremely happy with what happened.
You guys ever tell Era about it?
Oh yes, it's been mentioned, I think.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's just like the. Sorry for cutting you off. I
No,
just
it's okay. So there are moments where I want Era to explode back, but like, she like she doesn't really mind people blowing up at her because for her it's just showing like it gives them a chance to be honest. I guess I don't know. Um, but sometimes she be doing stuff. I would like them. I would like them to come to a resolution because in my opinion, I feel they have a good opportunity to become close, at least maybe in Era's eye, because I think she's pretty fond of Ellavorn, and she doesn't want to disrespect her, but she doesn't. She also she just doesn't understand her to the extent of.
both ways, because
I
say-
guess it's more in her behavior and reaction, certain things.
it's almost from what I see. And Nemo, feel free to obviously jump in and speak up about it. But how you described Durand and how what you see is what you get, and Ellavorn can understand him or understand most of him, and the things he does make sense. Now, Era is not Durand. There are layers to Era that what you see is almost always not what you're getting.
Yeah, true.
So that lack of understanding, I feel, definitely goes both ways, like between the characters.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So
I think yeah, go.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I do enjoy their interactions, whether they're bickering or not. I think it's interesting because I know like the dog thing kind of threw a lot of people off, but I don't know. It's more about like she's just trying to make amends in whatever way she thinks is possible. And for some reason, being a dog was a part of that.
I think Ellavorn's choice of, turning into animals and stuff when she's upset or whatever, it's kind of like feeling really intense emotions. She really only has room for one at a time. And so like
Mhm.
when she's really mad, she's really mad. And that's all she is. She's just mad.
Understandable, relatable. Then I too turn into a bear.
So it's like this, like kind of like, yeah, she can't talk that way, but that's kind of the point because words just aren't a thing. They're not enough. It's just, And also, her choice of bear it isn't like entirely to be like, oh, be afraid because I'm a bear, because obviously Ellavorn has become much more scary things like a T-Rex. It's more just like kind of like how a bear will defend, cubs or something, like just like being protective, like I'm
Ellavorn is Mama Bear. Ellavorn sees the whole party as her cubs, and she will defend them. Or not the whole party, her friends or the people that she comes to care about. She will defend them. And so angry maternal instinct plus angry equals bear. And obviously a story is not as interesting without some conflict. And conflict doesn't only have to come in the form of me just tossing demons at you. So I'm all
What you're
down
saying
for
is you want
conflict
more.
as long as it stays, between characters, and as long as it's well understood that none of that is personal, which I feel like is the case.
Confirm or deny Ellavorn involved in the destruction of my village. Now I wish to know.
Nope, you don't get to know.
Oh my god.
But, I mean,
He's gonna eat away
she
at me.
has a past. She just doesn't
Right.
know all of it yet. She's getting pieces back.
Tinfoil. We need tinfoil hats for the characters that are on the screen.
Everybody needs a tinfoil hat at this point. Ellavorn's conspiracy virus is spreading.
It's
We
weird.
need fighting.
It's like we all used to recognize that I was having these crazy conspiracy theories, and now they're just widely accepted as truth.
Like, what are you talking about? Of course the Marion is a vampire.
He is!
That makes sense.
He has all that blood and stuff, so it's a
Doc,
vampire.
please save us. You have to save these people.
Wait, who's gonna save us?
Doc's character.
Doc is gonna add fuel to the fire. He's an instigator. I know it.
Yeah. He definitely
I'll be
will.
your hero.
Yeah. When the cows fly.
Lucifer.
Lucifer.
Okay, when the
Cows
pigs
have blood.
fly. When the pigs fly.
There you go.
Sarah
On
can
it.
make that happen too.
But she
Please
hasn't
don't.
made it happen yet.
Yeah, not yet.
When the pigs fly, you just want to fight an alpha schnee. Here you go. I have to put this into the campaign at some point now.
Okay.
Can I seduce it?
No, no.
How do you see Ellavorn's story developing? Where they might be going? What are they excited or curious about for the future of the campaign as it pertains to her? And what are you, as a player, curious about outside of Ellavorn?
Everything.
Everything. I mean, one word answer, very much akin to Duran's Guardian. That makes sense. Ellavorn is curious. And that was just a little glimpse into what makes Ellavorn Ellavorn. I'm glad that you guys could stop by, have this chat. Thank you for anyone that decided to come by and listen. Next time, we will be talking about the one, the only, Arabelle.